That's how it was. That's how it happened. And you just heard the whole story. On the air on March the 5th on KGBS, I was taking phone calls from people all over the country that were very upset with what had happened down here, obviously. And I received a phone call from a gentleman that said, "Hey, I think there's a way that we might be able to get in contact with the Branch Davidians." And I said, "How's that?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I've got over 100 hours of videotape." Now, this is on March the 5th. I have over 100 hours of videotape, and I have noticed one thing. Their satellite dish has not moved since the raid Sunday morning. He said, "Why don't you ask them if they're listening, and if they are, have them move the satellite dish." I believe the satellite dish he thought was on Galaxy 6, I believe, and he wanted it, you know, if they were listening, to move the satellite dish to Galaxy 1. About 5 minutes later, he called back and he said, "The satellite dish moved. They're listening to you." So from that point on, I knew, and everyone else knew, that the Branch Davidians here at Mount Carmel were listening to my program every morning between 9 a.m. and 12 noon. And there have been reports that those programs and everything that was coming into this area was being jammed by the FBI and the ATF. And I know that to be another lie, because people that were in there till the day the fire started told me that they listened to my show every day until the fire. As a matter of fact, remembered one statement that I made when the fire actually, before the fire started. I told David, I said, "David, you've got to come out. They're not going to stop. It's just going to get worse. The only thing you can do now is to get your women and children and the men in there, leave the weapons inside, put your hands up in the air. Cameras are on you all over this country. Everybody's watching this. And you can walk out of there and no one else need die." And I said, "Come on, David." I said, "It's not going to get any better. It's just going to get worse. From this point forward, it's just going to get worse." And David Thibodeau, who was inside at the time, he was one of those that came out after the fire started, heard that plea. So we know that everything that was said from my radio program, as well as a number of other radio programs and television programs, were being seen and heard by the Branch Davidians, unlike some of the stories you've been told. The gentleman I was talking about a couple of minutes ago that suggested that the Branch Davidians move their satellite dish to see if David Koresh and the Branch Davidians were listening to me is our next speaker. He's given himself tirelessly over the last year, and it's cost dearly. It's cost a lot of us dearly. His name is Ken Fawcett. I'd like to introduce Ken Fawcett. Ken?
Thank you, Ron, and thanks for coming, everybody. I'm not a public speaker, so I got some good news. I'm going to be a little shorter than 30 minutes. We all miss Ron up here. I want to say that first of all, in the Dallas area. If there's any way he can get back on the air, I know I speak for everybody that we'd like to have him back on the air here in Dallas. I still believe that the United States of America is the greatest system in the world, and that our court systems are the greatest court systems in the world. And that was confirmed to me when on February the 26th of this year, all 11 of the Branch Davidian defendants were found innocent of murder and conspiracy to murder. Now there's still 8 of them still in jail, so there's something wrong with our system, and we can get around to fixing that. But the way to do it is peacefully, to work from within the system and try to get things fixed. I spent about 6 weeks in San Antonio covering the trial for Tom Valentine and also for Lou Epton in Las Vegas, who has a radio show there. And one of the things that I learned was that the system is geared against the defendant in these federal criminal cases. In spite of that, you had 12 men and women on the jury that said We're not going to stand for this anymore, federal government. We're drawing the line in the sand here. These people didn't have to put up with that kind of abuse, and we're going to send a clear message to the country and to the federal government that we won't tolerate assaults with tanks, with machine guns. This is not going to happen again in America. You're supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but the FBI called these people murderers and said they murdered federal agents for 51 days. And nobody seemed to ask them, well, what happened to presumed innocent until found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Our law defines murder very clearly. You must have, it must be something that you've thought about. It can't be an accident. That's accidental death or negligent homicide. Murder is very clearly defined under the law. And to get out on national television and say these people were murderers without a trial, that was wrong. Basically, in court, we were treated to a long list of witnesses by the government. I remember an Agent Lowell Sprague who gave us a very different version of the death of the first agent, Stephen Willis, than what we were told by ATF and even what Stephen Higgins and Dan Hartnett testified to before Congress in June. It was a totally different version of how Stephen Willis was killed. And what he said was that Willis got out of the cattle trailer with a bunch of other people, and they ran towards the front door, and Willis was shooting a fire extinguisher at the dogs. They heard firing start, so they retreated behind the cars. Willis got behind one car and fired a couple of clips out of his 9mm pistol. Then Stephen Willis ran behind a green and white van and fired some more from a green and white, or from a 9mm pistol. Then about 25 minutes into the firefight, Willis was hit. Well, now this is totally different from what we were told all along. We were told that Willis was shot immediately upon exiting the cattle trailer. Well, now why would they have a totally different story come out in court? Usually when you lie to the police, they think there's a reason. They think you're covering something up. Apparently the news media just thinks, well, they're the government. They can change their story. We're not going to ask them any questions. Well, we the people need to know why the story has been changed so many times on the death of those agents. Because they were the first ones killed, supposedly. That was the first big deal that happened out here, was those 4 agents. And they still have not answered. For me, for their families, for you the people, they still have not answered how those agents died. What was the real circumstances? When are we going to know the truth? There was an agent, Barbara Maxwell, that testified that she ran out of the cattle trailer, the first one that parked, just beyond that fence, or just to the end of that fence on the north end, that she got out of that cattle trailer and ran immediately away from the building as fast as she could get to the back of a white Ford van and took cover there and never fired a shot. Well, she wasn't a chicken. She was doing what they were supposed to do. They did have a contingency plan. It was testified to in court. Because of the presence of women and children, if firing started, regardless of who started it, the agents were not to return fire. They were to take cover and wait for reinforcements or instructions from their superiors. Did that happen? No, it did not happen. We had another agent, Tim Gabori, who testified in court that he took his pistol and his submachine gun and held it over his head like this and fired from the back of a pickup truck without looking about 75 rounds into the upper floors of that building. This is against every rule of police engagement, the rules of engagement that state clearly that you have to have an identifiable target, which is a threat to you or one of your fellow team or any person, before you can fire that weapon. And several agents testified they shot at hands moving in the window. Said he saw a pair of hands in the window, so he shot at that. Saw a curtain move, he shot at that. Well, who's behind those curtains? Was it a child trying to see what's going on? Was it a mother trying to scream, stop shooting at us?